Welcome to another episode of Builders, Budgets, and Beers. I'm your co-host, Reece Barnes, joined along with actually our producer today, Doug. Doug, do you want to give yourself a little intro here? What you do?
Sure, Doug Duvall, Motif Media. We do high-end video production and podcast production, usually around the building industry.
Doug's the man. If you need any type of podcasting need, give Doug a call. He'll get you taken care of. But on today's episode, we're going to be working with our good friend, Mark Phillips over at VFine Homes. Mark, he's a builder, businessman down in the Fort Worth area. And today we're going to be talking about the differences in roles from bookkeepers to controllers to CFOs, and really digging deep into the differences of those roles, why you need them, when you need them, and potentially who you already have on your staff that could fill those roles. Super unique, I think, and a super valuable perspective coming from Mark. They're running a great shop over at VFine Homes in Blue Quail. Let's go ahead and jump in and hear the deets.
Love it.
Let's kick this off, Mark.
Let's do it.
Everybody, for our listeners, super excited to have Mark Phillips here with VFine Homes and Blue Quail Homes out of Fort Worth, Texas. Mark, give the listeners just kind of a quick little background on yourself, little snip on VFine and Blue Quail, and we'll kick it from there.
Yeah. So I'm born and raised Tarrant County, which if you don't know, Fort Worth is the county seat. I grew up a little bit east of here in Arlington, came to Fort Worth in 2000 for undergraduate school, went to TCU, go Frogs.
Go Frogs.
And got married right out of college, needed a job because I was getting married, so I had to work.
Mm-hmm.
My actually first job was up in Denton, so about a little bit further north of where you're living right now.
Was it in building?
It was in home construction. Yeah, I worked for Pulte Homes.
Okay.
And spent 3 years with them doing warranty work. I was a service coordinator, warranty manager. And I fell in love with construction and home building, but then I quickly felt that I was kind of sleeping with the enemy. I didn't like the way that they were developing our plains and prairies and grasslands.
Totally.
And so went back to school and studied business, got an MBA back at TCU, and tried to get back in development. That didn't really pan out. So I worked in banking for a few years, and then an opportunity came up in 2013. I started talking with Rob Sell, who's the owner and president of VFine Homes,
Okay.
about coming to work with him. And we talked for several months and kind of came to an agreement about how I could come on the team. And at the time, it was really to kind of boost their commercial architecture and development side of things.
Okay.
And we tried that for about a year and didn't really work out as either of us had hoped it would. But about that time that wasn't working out, he needed some assistance in VFine Homes, the operating home building company. And knowing my background in banking and my degree in finance and MBA and those kind of things, he said, "Hey, would you mind stepping in and helping me do some of these things?" And so one thing led to another, and ultimately I became the CFO of VFine Homes.
Mm-hmm.
And then after doing that a couple of years, I was trying to think, how can we grow this operation? What can we do that's scalable? Because really everything at VFine Homes runs through Rob, which is fine. But it's really hard to scale that without demanding more of his time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought this idea would ultimately become Blue Quail.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rob and I found a business partner, a third business partner, Josh Mayo, who's president of Blue Quail,
Mm-hmm.
to run that. And so ultimately we created Blue Quail as a way to build something that's scalable. And so we're still building stunningly beautiful houses. We're just trying to do them a little bit smaller, a little bit more restrained in our design and kind of embellishments and the really cool things we do on V. We may sprinkle a couple of those things into our Blue Quail projects.
Sure.
But really we're trying to build something that can, in a given year, build, 10 to 12 houses a year in the Fort Worth market.
Sure.
And then once we kind of hit kind of the peak of what we can do with Blue Quail, our desire is to ultimately go and start a new market and a new market and a new market. But we've got the plans, we've got the specifications, we've got the processes in place to build these. And whether we organically grow into those markets or we come up with a franchise model with a local person who's maybe a home builder but doesn't want to do all the other stuff, is yet to be determined. But that's where we're at right now. And Blue Quail's life cycle is the early stages. We're still in our hometown and trying to just figure out how to make the flywheel work really good year in, year out.
Totally.
And then we'll say, okay, let's go try that on another market and go from there.
I love it. I love it. No, and that's, so hey, like great little snip there. A couple of pieces really stood out, namesakingly, like what I really do want to cover on the episode today, which is like, we talked to a lot of builders, and I think there's a lot of crossover, a lot of confusion in terms of like, what role does a bookkeeper perform? Does a controller perform? A CFO perform? At what points do builders need to start branching out and getting that type of talent? And I think, your story does a really good job at, or at least we can talk about this, but your background and your story of like coming up in construction, getting your MBA, obviously coming from like a finance business educated background, jumping into construction, a business that was wanting to grow. Like, tell me a little bit about what you started doing at the beginning of V Fine Homes, what those roles actually looked like, and then maybe some of those wins and losses that you guys had that you could fill those gaps on.
Yeah. Gosh, this is a great question.
A big question.
On there. Yeah.
A big question. We can unpack it.
And I really do think it looked different for everyone. I mean, a lot. So we're in a Builder 20 group, or were until recently. And seems like a lot of a good portion of the builders in that group, kind of a husband-wife team. The husband does the building and the wife does the billing, and around they go until they figure out, all right, we need to hire someone to help with this or that. So when I came on to V Fine Homes in 2014, they had a controller.
Okay.
And they had a fractional CFO. And that controller was a kind of controller / bookkeeper. Okay. She would do all the HR stuff, insurance, kind of just general paperwork, operational things that need to happen. But she would also physically enter every single bill, and everything was done on paper back then. In fact, we didn't move into digital. We were taking electronic bills that came in via email and printing them off and running everything. We still hear it. Believe it or not. We still hear it. Oh yeah. Well, COVID came along and I was like, well, we can't do the paper thing anymore because our guys are out in the field and they can't come in the office. And I was like, we need to figure out a way they can approve them on their laptop or whatever. So I jimmied this system through SharePoint, which was kind of cool, and I'm proud of myself for thinking of that and making that work. But it was inherently flawed. And gosh, I've started rambling now, and I'll bring it back. I'll bring it back.
So in terms of like the controller bookkeeper, right? I hear that a lot, and there is like crossover, and that's not to say that you can't like have people with blended experiences, but like, where do you really delineate the skill set? And we'll just start with like bookkeeper to controller, because that's typically how it goes, right? Like bookkeeper, controller, CFO, that's kind of the hierarchy. How do you really delineate that? Because I think it's important for the listeners to understand and like kind of visualize what kind of operation they have, who's doing what, and then kind of hit those triggers of, okay, you might need to start thinking about getting a controller. You might start thinking about getting a CFO. So when it comes to the individual who has, preceded you, or even your roles, like what did that look like?
There. Yeah. Let's start there. So the individual who preceded me, and I would call her a bookkeeper / controller. I would say she entered the bills, she cut the checks. Part of what brought me in was she was kind of on the precipice of leaving and company was having cash flow problems, not so much because of the business was bad, but because we had checks that weren't being put in the bank.
Oh shoot.
And
Okay.
just things were just, they were in a drawer.
The fun part wasn't getting done.
Yeah, it wasn't embezzlement. It was just like, I'm too busy, I'll get to that later kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so it just there wasn't a great handle on things. And the fractional CFO model wasn't working, because that really works if you have an owner / operator or an operator who's really involved in those things, because the fractional CFOs they're in and out.
Okay.
And so when I came on, the bookkeeper / controller had already gone. She had left, and we brought on our accountant to serve that bookkeeper role.
Okay.
And then I was going to step into the controller role, and really like my title CFO, but I'm really a controller.
Okay.
And I'm the only one in our company who does what we do. I think if I hire someone to take my spot, then I'll give them the controller title. I'll move up.
Totally.
But,
well, let's even define that. I don't mean to cut you off, but like, let's define, like, what does the day-to-day of a controller look like? Because I think bookkeeper is fairly standard. Like you're managing AP, expenses, might have a hand in receivables, but a lot of it is just like categorizing, making sure that books are reconciled, making sure that everything's closed out and lines up. But what does that role of a controller do?
Yeah, so I would say the controller is the person who's working alongside the bookkeeper to make sure everything's as it should be. And so the controller, and the way I've done it, is I'm reviewing financials, I'm reviewing draws, I'm making sure that what is going in to QuickBooks, in our case, the software we use, is accurate. If I see a number out there that doesn't make sense, I'm going to say, hey, bookkeeper, you're a whiz at QuickBooks. You need to fix this. Something's wrong here. And so managing HR, I would say, is very much a controller thing. Meeting with clients and going over budgets and talking through, areas that they're concerned about, controller thing.
Okay.
So for us, for Fee-Fi Homes and Blue Quail, we still use a bookkeeper. So, they're fractional. It's our accounting company. And so as bills come in through Adaptive, they're the ones who are coding them to the jobs and maybe putting a code they think it will go to. And they're serving a function of reconciling statements, because I just don't have time to do that. So they're going through and making sure all those statements are checked. And if there's any issues, they let me know, and then I can figure that out. So that's where I would kind of break up the roles, is data entry, kind of an administrative assistant on the financial side, I think is what the bookkeeper does. And that's what they do for me.
Perfect. And I think, like, even more of, do you have an opinion, or at least like a rule of thumb that you would suggest to the listeners in terms of, like, when would you be ready to have a controller? The person that's like really kind of like got the high level, the more strategic vision, the quality checking, the controlling the process. Is that a revenue number? Is it a project volume number? Is it a business growth situation? How do they decide that they need to get that hierarchy in their business?
And it's an interesting question you're asking, because that's really that's the role I moved into when back in 2000. See, I came on with V in 2014. In 2015 is when I moved into this position, or maybe early 2016. And so my whole experience these last 10 years or so has been in fulfilling that role. And so what did the company look like before that?
Right.
I would say, obviously, we got to a point where it was urgently needed to have a controller. And so at that time, I would say, I think every company's different, right?
Of course.
And so to paint a picture of our company, so the owner of Fee-Fi Homes is very creative. He's skilled at design and just understands product really well, and has no interest or desire to focus on the kind of day-to-day stuff it takes to just operate a company. I'm not saying a building company or an architecture company, just a company.
Which is common. You hear that with owners. Yeah.
And so he had a partner that fulfilled all those things. And then that role kind of changed. And so And so there really wasn't anyone doing that because his partner who had done it was no longer doing that.
Right.
And so I think that's the answer is if you have an owner that's willing to step in and just look at things and kind of roll your sleeves up and be in the numbers
Yeah.
day in, day out, that's when you need to hire that person.
Totally.
So
it's maybe even like less of like a revenue threshold, right? I think like that's, and maybe to my
Yeah.
fault, like even just like people in general think that it's like a threshold, right? It's like, okay, I've got to the 5 million mark. Now I'm ready for these types of people.
That's
right?
exactly right.
And it's probably not as much that as much as it is like, maybe it's like that realization that we might be bleeding cash, or we might not be capturing costs. And bleeding cash might be, like a dramatic term, but it might just be like those inclinations of like, this could be ran tighter than it is now. And that could be all the difference it takes for scale, for just running a more profitable business, just like feeling that need. Fair?
Absolutely. It is. And I would say a majority of owner operators, at least in my experience, do and want to have a solid handle on all of their numbers. And maybe it's more common than I thought. But I would say when you don't have a partner or a spouse or someone who's gifted in that and loves digging in the numbers,
right,
you need to hire that person because you could work really hard on making an extra 25,000 or 50,000 on this job or that job. But you can also lose 25 or 50,000 just like that by not having your books in order and not being on top of it, not sending bills out in time. And then you have trouble collecting the draws because you didn't send them out on time and the job's been closed for a few months. And there's just a lot that can happen. And so, it's not really a hurdle. I would say a dollar amount or number of years in operating. I would say you need to have that person day one. And when you don't, or when you, the builder / operator, decide you don't have enough time to do that, then you got to hire it out. Or you can hire a project manager and say, all right, you're going to be my guy who's building. And so they keep that role themselves and let a head of construction hire 3 project managers. And then it's like, okay, I'm out of construction. I've got a guy doing that now. But it's critical. At day one, you need to have that person.
Totally. Well, and when you say it's critical, and you mentioned, like not billing appropriately or billing on time, and like I hear a lot of this just in the day to day of, builders leveraging lines of credit to keep subs paid, just to manage cash flow because of all the time that it takes to get draws put together, or even just understand like, are we properly billed, underbilled, overbilled? What are our costs? What do we need to prepare for?
Yeah.
Like, what are some of, and we could just put it this way, what are some of the biggest wins that you've brought to the table, seen from a controller aspect of like, this is why you have a controller, because X happened?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is one you just said, which is getting a deposit from your clients. That was something that we learned about in our Builder 20 group, and everyone's saying, yeah, we require a deposit. And the funny thing is we were getting a deposit, but we were giving it back to the client within a few months. It was like, well, that kind of removes the reason for having the deposit. I don't know why.
How? Just like not billing for that amount?
Yeah. They would say, all right, we have $100,000 construction deposit. We're going to give you $10,000 back a month for the first 10 months of the job. And now you've given all your working capital. You just gave it right back to your client. So, and so increasing the size of that and saying, we're going to apply it at the end of the job, which, not typically, but sometimes you might have a client that says, oh, I'm going to hold payment until, even though we say, hey, we send you a draw, we do the work, it's due in 5 days. Without fail, there's someone every once in a while that'll say, oh, I'm going to hold this until you finish X, Y, and Z, or whatever. And so just saying, hey, no, we've got your deposit. We're going to apply that to the end. And then at the end of the job, once all the bills have been paid, we write them a check for whatever's left over their deposit that we didn't use up and give it back to them.
Got it. Okay. So like billing, I hear a lot of. I mean, are you getting into much like reporting on your day to day of like just overall cash flow of the business? What does that look like?
I'm not having to run a whole lot of reports because I'm in the numbers. If that makes sense.
Okay.
And I'm running reports while I'm in QuickBooks. In fact, that's most of what I do. But I'm not creating reports for myself to then review because I'm there. I do create
Yeah.
reports for my business partners at Blue Quail
Mm-hmm.
and for my boss at VFine Homes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not spending a lot of time reviewing those because I'm actually in QuickBooks or, just pulling up a P&L balance sheet, whatever,
Totally.
to see what's going on.
What does that conversation typically look like? Because like you'd mentioned, like you're in it every day. You got your MBA from TCU. Go Frogs, right?
Yeah.
Like all that stuff makes sense to you. What does that conversation and like breakdown look like for the owners to get value out of whatever reporting or at least conversation there is for them to have confidence that what's going on is good?
Well, there's trust there.
Of course.
Right. We got to start with that. And how it's kind of happened with us, which I think has been actually great. It's very organic. And so Rob or Josh may say, "Hey, what are we doing on this?" And they'll ask a very insightful question. I'm like, you know what? I don't know that we have a report for that. Let's look into that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'll print out a report and they'll ask a question about a different way of seeing the numbers than I've seen them before. So I think it's just good to have different perspectives, especially from people who aren't numbers people, to just ask questions, because when you're in it, a lot of times you can't see stuff. It's in home building too, right?
Right.
It's why Josh may be overseeing the guy who's building the house, and the guy who's building the house is building it, and he's there every day. But then I may come and walk it, and I may see three different things. Well, that's not his fault. It's just that he's in it every day.
Fresh set of eyes.
And the same is true with financials. Is, pardon me, if you're looking at them every day, you might miss something, and you might not ask the right question. So, I think it's absolutely critical that ownership sits down and reviews the numbers regularly and asks things different ways. Oh man, I didn't think about it that way. So
for sure.
You can't just leave it on that finance guy and think, oh, I've got a good finance guy and he's thought of all this stuff. It's like we can kind of get down in our weeds too, of like making sure everything's happening, everything's running on time, and everyone's getting paid, and we're not severely misconstruing our income statement because we're not doing our draws properly or whatever.
Totally. Well, and I think that's like kind of what I was getting at, is like, even just for the listeners, like let's say they do have the finance guy, right? And they're the owner that's just, I'm a creative, I am a craftsman, I love the product, I love delivering very high quality product, but numbers are just not my thing. What are some of those questions they could probably ask their finance controller type employee?
I think the best question is, how do we make more money? Like, how do we do a better job stewarding this company that we've been given to steward? And I'll take this briefly one direction, but we believe that these are resources and people that we've been given by God to manage, and we want to manage them well. We want to have an impact on the urban environment for better. We want to build things that when people are out walking their dog or just driving around the neighborhood, that they see and they're like, wow, that's awesome. That's beautiful. We want to manage our clients' resources well so that we're not wasting their money. And so how can we do a better job and be more efficient? How can we protect the jobs better? So one of the things we started doing recently, and a friend sent me this link, but we're putting security cameras up on our houses. We don't have them up on all of them yet, but we're just now starting that process. So for $200 a year, for a $200 camera, one-time purchase, and $200 a year, we have cellular service and solar powered cameras that are going up on our jobs. And so not only does that deter theft, but it's like, hey, is so-and-so over at this job? Well, let me pull up the camera and see, oh yeah, the plumber's there. I see his truck. It's right outside. So little things of just constant improvement. How can we make, so I said the question, how can we make more money? But what are things that other people are doing? What can we do to improve our operations? And so being part of Builder 20 or other organizations to just say, how are we doing better? Or being humble enough to say, hey, I recognize I don't have the market on most operable home building companies. So what consultants are out there that could say, hey, let me look at your numbers a different way. It's worked for other industries.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if there's a way that I can help you guys build your houses faster, which makes more money, right? Because, if we're making $100,000 a job over 1 year, we make $100,000 over 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big difference.
Totally.
So building faster is a big part of that.
Totally. And that's, I think, like the big takeaway here, because like even the theme of like bookkeeper, like that's, and we've been talking to, several of our, accounting partners, and it was interesting. We had a slide that was in one of our decks that pulled up, and it said like, we want to help construction companies focus on more bookkeeping, less cleanup. Right. So when you start to think about like the role of a bookkeeper, and like it's typically laced to like this like monotonous, mundane, tedious, labor intensive role, it's all massively important. And that's like really the foundation of it. So like having a strong bookkeeper is obviously like very important. But then having that controller, and like my takeaway here, Mark, is like it's really kind of like an accounting or a finance minded individual that's also just having like an overall operational like pulse on the business. Like it's not just like crunching numbers. It's like, how could we take something like security cameras and translating that into how is that going to directly impact the P&L or the health of this business from a like a theft situation? You think about theft and you're like, obviously there's cost going out the door, right? Stolen material. But it's how could we make this a healthier business overall, not just getting the categorizations down, not just getting the reconciliations down to report on the business. Is that a fair take?
Yeah, absolutely. I, as you know, I'm a huge fan of adaptive. Like, I told you I met Frank down in Austin and at the Build Show conference, and it has helped us tremendously. One of the key ways, and you alluded to this a second ago, but just data entry where we would get double bills. And that's not to say that still doesn't happen sometimes, but that's dramatically gone down where it's like, all right, hey, we sent you, when we do cost plus draws, we may enter something as a bill here using the quote and then enter it again as a bill using the actual invoice. And so we send through 2 bills and we can figure that out and clean that up. And on the next draw, we put it back in there as a credit and it offsets it. But the time wasted having to go back and clean up stuff, having that go away has just been a huge improvement. And so to me, it's been an incredible journey and a huge boost for both V and Blue Quail to be on that platform.
Totally. Well, and I think like that's like, and I appreciate the kind words, but I think like that's like really that's why we're doing the podcast. That's why we are at Adaptive every day, building software, selling software, getting people to adopt software, is because I think the big goal is to give builders more control with less work over their project financials. And I think that does tie into this conversation quite well, right? Of delineating like between these different roles, because I think a lot of builders, they do, fall into the trap of I've got someone that takes care of this, right? And that's why I wanted to have you on to kind of hear your take. Like, what are the benefits? Is this the right person, or should we be considering different avenues and maybe, upskilling someone, which is a very real conversation now, especially when people aren't having to do all this manual, tedious work. But even more so, like, do we need to bring someone else in with a little bit heavier background that's going to look at this a little bit more through an analytical lens, more of a control lens? Because that's the number one way builders go out, is they can't manage cash.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah. And builders, I mean, they have superintendent, project manager, director of construction.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same way. You've got bookkeeper, controller, CFO, owner. I mean, the extra layers are needed because you're a little bit higher up, and then you're a little bit higher up, and you're able to pull the next person up is able to pull themselves out of the weeds a little bit from the person below them. Because there's weeds at every level, but you need to kind of have that chain. And so, bookkeeper, controller, CFO is the same thing. You've got to have accountability all the way up the chain, and people doing that. So,
totally. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say it's made our company, and I've been in this role, in this specific role for about 9 years. But it just lowers the temperature of the office when you've got good cash flow, and you can sit down and focus on what's the best way to build this mantle, and stop and think, is this the right stone selection? Just be able to lower the blood pressure, because there's enough pressure from just building a beautiful house and building it on time and on budget, that to have this extra stress of always worrying about cash flow and money going in and out and hiring, and do we have the right people? And if you can just do the ABCs week in, week out, you save, it's what you save yourself. It's the heartache and stress that really distracts you from doing what you do best. And so I would say to that builder who's trying to figure out, okay, I really want to go this direction, and I really don't want to be the finance person. Don't just let that go. Find the person that you trust that can do that well. Still be involved, but find that person, because as you let that go, it can cause a lot more heartache than it's worth.
Totally. Now, I think even, when that builder is looking for that person, do they have to have an MBA from TCU? Do they have to be named Mark Phillips?
It helps, but no.
Who should they look for? Like, is it, because I see like
Yeah.
your background's obviously like very applicable. Like, and Rob like snagged a good one, right? Background working at like big production builder, understood the mechanics, like the production side of building. Obviously, you went in, focused on finance, focused on accounting, business, like fantastic background. But I mean, can they go into, like, as we call it in software, like cross vertical? Like, could this be someone who doesn't know construction accounting, or should they focus on, should they upskill their bookkeeper? Go ahead.
I think it requires two things. One, someone who cares. And then secondly, someone who enjoys digging into numbers and making sure things are balanced and things are done right. If you don't enjoy digging in numbers, you're not going to be good at this job, because there's just number after number and spreadsheet after spreadsheet. So if you don't enjoy figuring out how to solve puzzles, every day you're solving a different puzzle, you're not going to enjoy your work, and you're going to burn out. And then second, someone who just cares because it's right and good and honorable. And it's a position that could easily be abused. So you have to have someone you trust, and just to make sure that they're, being honest with your clients, honest with your subcontractors, and just handling that with highest ethics. So it's got to be someone you trust. And really, as long as you find someone who cares and who's good with numbers, it's what I found is there's a lot of stuff that, sure, I learned in school or whatnot, but it's just being willing to ask the question of, if something's not making sense, okay, well, why not? And spending time. I mean, we live in an incredible time where you can type something into AI or ChatGPT or even before that Google, and find a video on how to do certain things. So if you've got someone who's a learner and willing to dig in and figure it out, and has kind of a base understanding of accounting, then you can make that person work. They do not need to have an MBA. They just need to care.
Totally. No, I think that's like super powerful, because like when we do, I mean, we talk to a lot of builders, and we talk to a lot of, bookkeeping controller type individuals. And I think there's a lot of those people out there working at construction companies. You've got someone who might be like an office manager, bookkeeper hybrid, right? Who like they're owning that role, and they're trying to sit here and like, how can we elevate? How can we make this business better? And they do have it internally, but I think that it's almost like this, well, I'm not a controller, or like, I don't have those skills, or I need to go get this degree, or like whatever. And it's like, you might have more of it than you need. And what could you do if you could just focus more on the hunting down, and what is the legitimacy of these books, and how can we run this tighter, and what could we be doing from an adding or a value add to the business standpoint?
In many ways, I think those are the best people for the job, because everything builds on itself, right? And so it's why superintendents a lot of times make good project managers, because they know what to look for.
Mhm.
And so after, creating draws over and over and over again, and now you're going to come up here or whatever it is, entering bills,
Mhm.
you've developed that base understanding where it's now, okay, I've got this. I can teach this. I can do this in my sleep. I can teach this. I'm ready for that promotion and to grow and do the next thing.
Totally.
So,
Totally.
Yeah.
No,
Great people.
I think this was great, Mark. Honestly, I think there was a lot of like good action in here, a lot of applicability. I really appreciate hopping on. Do you have any words of wisdom or final comments more so than you've already provided?
I've enjoyed being on. I'm sad Matt missed it. I understand it's for an incredible reason, an incredible blessing. So I'm excited for him.
Yes.
And his family. But no, have you been to the rodeo yet? Have you come down to check out the stock show and rodeo?
February 8th. My wife and my parents, they're coming down. They're going to do a little exploring in Dallas, Fort Worth with us. So we're going to hit February 8th. We're super excited. My wife literally just bought tickets this morning.
Great.
So
yeah.
Well, I have no
I'm going on Friday.
On Friday?
Yeah.
We'll just miss each other.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
wait, was Friday the better day?
You need to come.
Is Friday the better day?
No. They're all great. They're all great. And Dickey's is an incredible venue, but I would try and spend some time walking the stock show part of it.
Totally.
Walk through the Midway, check out the carnies over there, and all the livestock. I mean, the pigs, the rabbits, the cows. I mean, everything is just it's really cool. You can walk right through and walk right up to this giant hog and put your arms around her, or a lamb or something. I mean, they got everything there. So it's just it's a little bit of Americana, little piece of Americana. It's a lot of fun. So we try and take the kids every year. So yeah, we're going on Friday.
Love it. Yeah, we'll be and we're gonna have plenty of time. I mean, I think we're planning on going down there around like 1.
Yeah,
and I think the rodeo starts at like 7.
Yeah. Oh gosh,
we're gonna have plenty of time.
Tons of time.
Lunch.
Yeah, and then they've got like trucks, and they've got all the other stuff. Okay, yeah, you're doing it right.
Yeah. We'll spend some time
going to the Drover at lunch.
Probably. I mean, or Joe T's. Or Joe T's. Okay. What do you think? Joe T's or Drover?
Totally on a nice day, go to Joe T's.
Yeah, Joe T's. Yeah. Maybe have a margarita.
No doubt. Drover's amazing, but on a nice day, yeah, go have a margarita. Now that's north side, so you're going to coming down to the cultural district for the stock show. You know that, right?
Yeah. So so I've been there before. We've done Joe T's. I was a fan. Great experience. Love the mariachi bands. We sat in the garden. Great spot.
Yeah.
I'd love to show the folks. Awesome. But we then walked to Drover, which is a little bit of a hike, but it is whatever.
Yeah.
Well, and then we I think we walked down to like Billy Bob's, because isn't it like Drover is like right down the street. And you walk. Is it Dickey's? Is the arena or whatever?
So Dickey's is in the cultural district. Everything you mentioned is up on the north side.
Okay.
So the Exchange Avenue and North Main. But so Drover, Joe T's, Billy Bob's, all in the north side.
Yeah.
That's usually what they show whenever Fort Worth gets a call out on TV. It's like they show the cattle walking down the bricks Exchange Avenue. But go there. Joe T's for lunch, but then you're coming down for Dickey's. That's in the cultural district. So that's kind of on the near west side where all the museums are. So two different areas. The rodeo at one time, I believe, was in the north side, several, maybe decades ago.
Okay.
It was up there. And then they moved it to Will Rogers. And then a few years ago, they built this new arena, which is very nice. And they're attracting bigger talent now and all that stuff. I like the old Will Rogers, but that was my kind of favorite spot to go watch rodeo. Yeah, but it was, you get smaller names in the rodeo, and it was just this is kind of a step up to the big leagues a little bit.
Yeah, they had more to prove. Yeah,
it was great. I kind of yearn for the old days, but no, the Dickey's is great. Dickey's is great.
Well, that just exposes how little I know about Fort Worth, albeit I've been here for like a month and a half. I'm still learning.
2 months, yeah.
I'm still learning. I'm learning. I hope I make it to the right place. I hope I don't show up to the rodeo and they're like, "This is an Applebee's." Like, you're at the wrong spot.
No, but just Dickey's Arena, you'll find it.
Dickey's Arena. Okay. No. Appreciate you, Mark. This was good.
Appreciate you having me on. This is great. And how much longer are you here? Are you here for a few more months?
We're going to be here until the beginning of April.
Okay. Well,
my wife's covering for like a colleague, let's call it. She's out on maternity leave.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it might
Awesome.
go a little bit over, but we're just kind of, got the call from Kiewit, and we're like, yeah, we'll make it happen. So
Well, let's grab breakfast again before you head back to wherever it was.
Yeah.
You
Before I
hailed
head back
from.
to Denver. Before I head back to Denver with my beer and my beard and my craft beer.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, we'll definitely we'll set it up.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks for having me on. This was great.
You bet.